Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to look at my dive scoreboard project. In the spirit of the Olympics coming up, I thought it'd be really cool to have a scoreboard, a tracker for the competitors doing diving. I was a diver in high school and I coached in college, and so diving is pretty special to me. I did some basic adjustment or variables that can be changed. So the first part is 6 dives or 11 dives. For the Olympics, we're really going to be seeing 11 dives. But for ease of showing this application, we're going to stick with the 6 dives. This is typically more for high school. You could have either anywhere from 3, 5, or 7 judges. And I'll show you how that's going to play in effect here. So with 3 judges, we've got judge 1, 2, and 3. And this will show the information for the diver, the dive number, dive name, and degree of difficulty. We'll get to that in a little bit. For 5 judges, we add 4 and 5. And for 7, we add 6 and 7. We'll leave it for 3 for now. The point of the having more judges, so they'll take the middle 3 judges' scores, meaning that whatever all the judges score, everything gets entered in, and they drop the lowest and the highest. If it's 5 judges, and if it's 7 judges, they drop the lowest 2 and the highest 2, and they take the middle 3, add those together, and multiply it by the DD per dive, or degree of difficulty for the dive. You can then have also 1 meter and 3 meter and 10 meter. 1 meter typically is going to be your high school, 3 meter, maybe some high school for a club and stuff, but that's going to be the springboard diving in the Olympics. And then 10 meter will be the platform, the really tall tower platform with no springboard. So we're going to keep it there for now. This just has to do with changing the degree of difficulties and the dives available in our makeshift database object that we have, which I'll show you later. So we're going to put, and we also start this out with just 1 diver at first. So we're going to start to there we go. Enter, we're gonna add 1 fin dog as that. Add the team of USA. Then we're going to add some dives. So the way it works in a brief overall understanding, if it's a dive that starts with a 1 for 100s, that's gonna be your forward, 200s are backs, 300s are reverses, 400s are inward dives, 5,000s are twists for all the other dives, and actually for platform, you also have arm stands, which start with 6 added. I'm not going to add those in right now. They are involved in the code and can be used. So we'll start with a 101, for instance. That means it's a forward dive in the straight position. It's half a rotation, so it's 1/2 rotation. If we click off of it, we've got a forward dive straight. If we want a forward somersault, then it would be a 2, because it's 2 half rotations. Now let's say we're going to give them a back dive in the straight position. We're going to give them a reverse somersault in the tuck position. So A is straight position, B is pike position, C is tuck position, and D will be free, and that's only going to be available for twist dives. So we've got a reverse 1 somersault tuck position. One of my favorite dive, inward dive pike. And then we'll do a forward dive half twist. And this one actually happens to be, you can do it in a straight position. So nothing in the score was going to change. Now this is just inputting the stuff for the competition. Now there's actually a whole lot of rules on the amount of degree of difficulty the total can be and which dives can go where. We're not going to worry about that now. We're going to assume the coach did all of that and we're just inputting it to track it, which is exactly what will happen at the Olympics. If you're watching it, you want to keep tabs on it, you just input what they have on the screen. We'll add a Chris on here. We'll say they're from the USA as well. We'll give them some of the same dives as we have. We might up some. Let's give them a 1.5. If I input a dive that doesn't exist, it'll say you have entered a dive that doesn't exist. And that could be that maybe it exists on one of the other, maybe it's a 1 meter dive and it doesn't exist on 10 meter or vice versa. It just gives you a little bit of a restrictor and reminds you, hey, we don't have any information for this, so you're going to have to type in something else. One of my other favorite dives. And we'll give them a back twist. Okay, so in our meet, we're just only going to be 2 people, and that's what it's going to be for now. So now what we want to do is we want to actually go and score a dive. So you can say, okay, diver 1 fin dog will be doing a 101A, which is a forward dive in the straight position, degree of difficulty 1.6. It's usually how they're going to read it at the meet. So this makes it easy if this is at the judge table or something like that. And you can give them anywhere from a 0 all the way up to a 10 in half-point increments. So let's say we could give them like a 2.5, and we'll give them a 5 and an 8. You should never really see scores this spread apart. Sometimes it can happen. It's weird when it does. So when I calculate it, it's going to add those 3 up, multiply it by 1.6. It's going to give me a score for the dive of 24.8. So now my total score for this meet so far is 24.8. And now it's going to take someone 24.8 points to catch up, and on average with the remaining dives they have available, divided by that, or dividing 24.8 divided by 6, because they still have not done their first dive, will be 4.13 points per dive to catch up. So we'll have him go, and we'll say he did really well, marginally well, with getting 6s across the board. They all agreed. And he's now in the lead with 28.8. So I have a 4 points to catch up. Now, as you saw, this automatically re-ranked them. So technically, if it's in the going in dive order, then I'd have to go here. That could get frustrating. I really wanted to stick to the rank. The rank was more important to me, so that's why I kept it here. Feel free to change it up, and maybe you want to stick to that and rank later or something else. Or maybe you want to have a column for ranking over here and keep them in the same order. So we'll give him 5, let's give him a 9.5. So you can go all the way up to 10, like I said. And now I'm back in the lead at 59.9 points. And we'll just go through and we'll give him 9s across the board for this one. Awesome. So fin dog 1 with 159.35. So a 5.15 lead. You can always go and rescore a dive. So if you inserted something wrong, you can go back and update it. And then now you'll see it. There we go. That's where it was. And to click the right dive. So that's the idea of this program. It will constantly be re-ranking, and you can have many, many divers. So if we go and look at the code, we'll start on the HTML side. So show it's an HTML. We have our HTML tag and our header, pretty much the same as I have on all my other pages. One fin dog dive scoreboard, where we are bringing in the JS script of the header and the dive list. I'll show what that is. This is going to store all of our dives. So this is kind of our dive database. It's an object of all the dives. And then we have our CSS files, global, the dive card, header, and footer. Starting our body off. So we've got this is our header, just to show what is on the page. We have this for the JavaScript if we ever want to utilize that with the JavaScript. Right now we're not for any pages other than the home page, but we could. And we have one card on this page, and it has a button wrapper. So this is for the top section that has all of the different radio buttons. So the first part is going to be our dive count. So is that the 6 dives or 11 dives? We have a class of flex, and that's just to make it so that instead of the divs being on top of each other, they're going to be side by side. We can look at that class when we get there. But anyway, this is for the CSS styling. Same here. There's right border and then radio button spacing. Take a look at that when we get there. So for the input, you can have multiple types of inputs. This one happens to be of type radio, so that gives it a click button. If you don't have anything there, then it'll be like you're just typing in text, like I have for the name and the team. I have a name of dive count. Now this is actually important for radio buttons. Haven't found much of a need for it other than for radio buttons, but this allows them to be grouped and will allow the user to only click one at a time. So if they click the 6 dive, it declicks the 11 dives, and vice versa. If you click the 11 dives, it declicks the 6 dives. I have an on-click function, and so this will just set the JavaScript state basically to show that, nope, we're looking at 6 dives now instead of 11 dives. And I have this one defaulted to be checked. And then I have, it says 6 dives. This one has 11 dives, so that's just kind of its label. Moving on to the second group of buttons. Basically the same thing here. We've got flex, right border, radio button spacing. We'll talk about that later. Class, radio button spacing. And then we have our name. This is going to be judge count. So this is how many judges there are, 3, 5, or 7. And so that's why all of these are named that. Type radio button. All of those are going to be the same. They all have on-click functions, which are just going to set the judge count to either 3, 5, or 7. And with the label of 3 judges, 5 judges, or 7 judges, with 3 judges being the checked by default. And here I have left border, right border, and then everything else is pretty much the same. And then lastly, for our top button groups, we have our what height of the board it's going to be. So we have a class of meter, flex we're still using, right border, right button spacing. Again, we're going to use right border, right button spacing. Name's going to be meter for all of them. Type radio button or radio. On click, we're going to set the meter to be either 1, 3, or 10. Again, that's going to be our JavaScript right there. We are automatically checking 10, mainly because this is for the Olympics, and they're going to be doing 3 and 10 meter, so I just decided to keep it started at 10. And then the labels 1 meter, 3 meter, 10 meter. Then we have our table, which I gave an ID of diver table. So the first row by starting out is going to be the header row. So it's going to be rank, name, team, the 6 dives, score to win, average to win. And then so that's for our row. Again, we've got a row. TH means table header. If you have TD, that's table data. So this already has some preset styling. You can obviously always change that. Usually it makes it bold and stuff like that, so I just keep it there as a table header. And then this is where things get kind of interesting. So this is what we call a modal. That's where I was clicking on score and it popped up as an overlay on top of the actual site to enter the judges' scores. So what this is this is where we bring in the dive card, JavaScript, and we are creating a div, which is going to be this whole section right here, give it the ID of judges modal, class modal. That's going to be our styling, and this will be so we can grab it from the JavaScript. We have a div inside of that, modal content. We have a span, which will be our closing X. So if you didn't want to calculate for whatever reason, you can click the X. At times it's just the multiplication symbol, and so it also looks like a closing X, so I used that. And if you click that, it'll hide the judges score modal. And then we have a header and the actual score input div. So if you've noticed, they're actually empty. That is because we will update that based off of what the user clicks. So if this makes sense, it's actually always there. It's just hidden when it wasn't clicked on, when it's not being used. And then when we want to show it, we just unhide it. And then we have our button that will add our diver, and it'll call the JavaScript function add diver. And we close things. We have our footer, and that is the HTML. So if we go back, let's take a quick look at the CSS. For all of the inputs, I got rid of the number, the arrows to click up or down to increment, because it just gets in the way. And for actually the inputs I'm looking for, I'm not using numbers, except for, I guess, the judges, but for the names, and it just didn't look good. So we just got rid of that. Feel free to comment that out, and you can bring it back. So when you have a class selector like this, you're saying that all THs or TDs will abide by these styles. So that's going to be your table headers and your table data. So we're centering it. We created the font size to be 10 pixels, padding. The top and bottom are going to be 0, and left and right are going to be 5 pixels. Left border, you can also do this with the padding. You can call out exactly which one. I prefer to do it that way. And then for the left border, it's going to be 1 pixel, solid black. Same thing for the right. And that's why we see double lines within the table. Table in total, we wanted to give it no margin on the top or bottom, but it's going to be auto on the left and the right. Basically, it makes it centered. Input, all inputs are going to be width of 40 pixels, unless otherwise stated by another selector. So for the actual modal class, it's going to be hidden by default. It's going to be fixed position, so it's going to stay in place. If you scroll or anything behind, the front will always stay there. Z index makes it to the very, very, very front, so that means it's going to sit on top of everything. Left and top, because it's fixed position, we can tell exactly where the position is. Width is going to be 100 and 100, and height is going to be 100. Overflow, so it's going to be auto, so it's going to make it scrollable if I make it long enough. And we have a background color right there. And then we have our content box, and that's just going to give us the background color, so it's going to be a little bit off from actual white. We have our margin, our padding, border, and our width. The close button itself just gives us a color. It floats it to the right. Font size of 28 and font weight bold. For the button, we have a hover and a focus. So if it's in focus, it'll turn black. It'll have no text decoration, and a cursor will be pointer. If you hover, same thing. So for the modal, the judges score modal, we just wanted it to be flex, which again makes it, instead of being stacked on top of each other, it makes them side by side. Also probably could have just added the flex. The reason sometimes I will do that is if I know I might need to change something in the future, or it might look like it, and so that is sometimes why I will make it separate, just so you don't have a ton of names in the class list. His or her own. I do some JavaScript to look at if it's 3 judges, 5 judges, or 7, and based off of that, I change the spacing on it. So that's why we have those. Radio buttons, radio button wrapper. I want it to be flex. I want the border bottom to have to be a line, just kind of a separation between that and the rest of the scoreboard. We have our padding bottom and our padding and our margin bottom. Again, padding is going to be inside of the div, so it's going to be between the border and whatever your content is. Margin is going to be your border outside and between the outside of your border and any other element around it. For dive count, we've got margin left 0, margin right auto. Flex, again, we're just displaying to be flex. Left border just gives us a left border, right border gives us a right border. Radio button spacing gives us 5 pixels on the left and the right. This is cool. So even row background, when I added another diver, it was gray. So if I had another one, it's going to be white. And so that's what this does, is it oscillates those colors, so it makes it a little easier to determine which diver is which as you go across. Meter, I just wanted everything to be 0 except the bottom, or sorry, except the left spot, and that one's going to be auto. And that basically pushes it all the way to the right, because the right margin is going to be 0. Then we have our modal header elements, and we're going to have that 0 margin on top and bottom, auto on the left and the right. And judge modal header, everything's going to be 0 except the bottom, which is going to be 15 pixels. Now on to the JavaScript. We're going to start here real quick. So for the dive list, we have an object of platform dives, which I guess technically is also Springboard dives. This is the site I got all of them from. So they should be up to date as of today. So for the 1 meter, you've got all of the dives. So you'll see some redundancy, it looks like, at first, but then you realize they have different DDs. So for instance, for our 101, which is a forward dive, you can have straight, pike, or tuck, straight, pike, tuck, and your degree of difficulty would be 1.4, 1.3, or 1.2. So each one of them has a name and a DD. So that has been done for all of them. Here's your 3 meter. I just put breaks in there between the different, so here's your 5,000. So there's all of these for the forward dives, 5 forward dive twists, back dive twists, reverse dive twists, and inward dive twists. And then you've got 10 meter. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we will see we've got some 600s and actually some 6,000s as well for the arm stand twists. So all of these numbers are valid. So we start out with an empty array of all the dive cards. We have dive count. We're starting out at 6, judge count 3, and board height of 10. And I just put in there what the other options are as well. So we can add a diver. We don't take any inputs for it. We create an empty array. It'll be temporary. We go through the dive count, which again will be 6 for this one, and for that we will create an object for each one, because each dive will have a number, a name, a DD, the judges. And I just put the max amount here. So for a 3 judge meet, these will just be null. For a 5 dive meet, these 2 will be null. For 7 dive meet, they will all get filled. And then our score. Once it's created all of those for every dive count, then we will push that to this all dive cards. We'll give it the rank of whatever the current length is plus 1. So for instance, when we start out, we're going to have 1 in there already. So it can't be rank 1. It's going to be rank 2. So that's why we have to add 1 to it. The next part is going to be the name. So we'll leave it blank. The team will be blank. The dive list array, well, we just created that. This is the total score. So this is the per dive score. This is the total score. This will be how much they need to win or tie at least, and then that divided by the remaining dives they have left. And then I'm going to call this reprint divers. So this allows us to be able to add a diver and not have to lose all the data above it. So every time a change occurs, it just is going to reprint. It's going to look at all the dives in this dive cards array and print them out. So if it's 6 dives, then it knows to only have the headers through 6. If it's 11 dives, it knows to have the headers from 1 through 11. That's one thing that changes. Everything else is the same. Here's another way to make a for loop. So I can say for dive card and all dive cards. That's going to give me the indice of all the dive cards. So I'll just say 0, 1, 2, 3, however many I have. So we have the rank. And our name. And the team. So basically here I'm creating what that HTML is going to look like. So it's a TD, a table data of all dive cards, or of the all dive cards array at the dive card index, and we know it's going to be that first position. First position will be the rank, which we just talked about right here. It'll be this part. Team name, or name will be the second part. Team will be here. Dive 1, 2, so we have to go a little deeper. And we actually I created a secondary function for this. And we have the divert number input box. So that's going to be your input. And it's going to give all the class information, the number. So this is the ID. And we want it to be the dive number. And then we give it a code. So this is going to be the dive index or the dive card. So it'll be which diver is it, and then which dive in the card is it. So it could be the first diver, so that could be 0, and then it could be diver or dive 1, so it could also be 0. And we follow that all the way through. We also set the value. So whatever the value in the array is, we are looking at that specific diver, the diver index, and the dive index dot number. And then we also create the on change. So whenever that change is in there, we call this function again. We are getting that based off of the dive card and the dive index so that it is there in the on change. We do the same thing for the dive name. So again, we're looking back into the in the array, and if it's empty, then we're just going to give it a dash. If it's not, we actually then put whatever was in that name slot. We do the same thing for the DD, and we do the same thing for the dive score. I'll remove this because clearly this is commented code that we don't need. So same thing. In fact, this one, so this is our button. If there is no score, or if the score is null, then we just say the button has the word score on it. Otherwise, we give what the score is. And we put all that together in a table row, and that's what we return back up here. So we do this for dive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I don't automatically do it for 7, 8, 9, and 10. One, because it may not have it. So only if it has dive count of 11, we'll add in those dives. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Otherwise, I just go on as normal. Score is going to be whatever is in the 4th position. The 5th index, or index, the 5th index for to win. And the average to win will be the 6th. Again, if it's null, we give a dash. Otherwise, we give whatever that value is going to be. So if it's 6, we put all this together, and as you can see, we have a table row. So we get it by the ID, which is that diver table. In our HTML, again, highly want to let you know this took me a little while to debug. Make sure your HTML is in capital letters. So since we cleared it out by setting it to only this before, we can do a plus equals, which will just add an append to that element. And what I'm doing is if the dive card modulo 2, which means divided by 2, has a remainder equal to 1, then we're going to give it the even background. Otherwise, we're not. So I guess it's kind of backwards. But the point is the same. It's going to give it an oscillating color background. And then we're going to add the rank, name, team, dive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, score to win or average to win. If it's 11, basically the same thing. We go all the way up to 11, score to win, average to win. We have update name. So as a part of all of this stuff, we have this is the function that you send in what the dive card is, so which user, which diver it is, and what the name, and the name index. We go and we grab that spot in the array, and we go and we grab the element value. And we can do that because we know that it's going to start with diver name, the card, and the name index, which should be 1. The reason, I guess you could hard code it or you could have it sent in. I decided to send it in as a parameter. For update team, same thing. Dive card, team index. I'm going to create it, grab the value, and we're going to set that value to whatever has been entered in. And these are our on-change events for those inputs, which we can actually see if we go right here. Update name, update team. Update dive number, basically the same thing, a little bit extra though. So we're gonna first grab whatever that dive number is that was entered. If it's board height equals 1, then we're going to search the 1 part of the object. If it's not undefined, we set the number, the name, the DD from that part of that file in those areas, and we reprint, since the reprint already knows how to go and look for that once it's already in the array. If it is undefined, we send an alert, you have entered a dive that does not exist. Same thing for 3 and 10. So it just depends on which one you have selected. Update score, judges score modal. So once we'll show in a little bit how we show the modal, but first we need to, we update what the content is going to be. So depending on how many judges there are and what the dive is, And what the diver is, we want to update. So now we have the update judges score. So once we grab the dive card and the dive index, we then can know what the diver name is, diver number, dive number, dive name, dive degree of difficulty, and then how many judges there are. So depending on how many judges, we do a switch statement. And what that means is going to take whatever I is, and whichever case it matches, it will execute that code. Because I have break in there, it will not do anything else. It'll just do whatever that line is. So if it's case 1, it'll execute judge score equals all of those, or all dive cards, dive card 3, and dive index. So whatever the score that was entered for that judge is. And then it'll break. Because we don't need it to do the rest of it. It'll come back through and do the rest. In our loop. Then we add that, and then we also add the button. And that's our calculate button. And that again will have a on click of calculate single dive score. So this will be how we show the judge score modal. So depending on the dive card and the dive index, we send that information in. It updates the score modal, which is what we just talked about. And then it turns the display. So it grabs the actual modal, changes the display to block. So it's block or none. Clicking on the X will turn it to none. Clicking anywhere else on the screen outside of the box will turn it to none as well. That's a typical thing for modals that you can click outside of it and it should get rid of it. So this is what the math is for, or the function is for calculate single dive score. Again, we just take in the dive card, the dive index, start out the score at the 0, score array. Does it have an error? So we cycle through all of the judge counts and we add to it. If it's not divisible equally by 0.5, then we throw an error saying that a certain judge has an invalid score. Otherwise, we just add it to the array. If we're calculating it and the DD is null, then we warn them you have not entered a degree of difficulty for this dive, meaning there can't be a score yet. Then we look to see if there's an error. If it does not have an error, we move forward. And so that's why we set this to have an error as true. We also set a bad judge score to be true. So that's why that's important. If all judge scores are good and we have a DD, then we move forward. So if it's 3, we save those judges' scores into our array. We also add up all of those, and that becomes our score so far. For 5, we save them all the judges because we're going to sort them now. So we only sort our temporary array, and then we add, now that we know it's sorted, we can add just the middle 3. And then the same thing for 7. We save all of those judges' scores, sort it, and we know that we saved the middle 3. Then for that dive, we .score and we save the score times whatever the DD for that dive is. We want to only give it 2 decimal places, so that's what this 2 fixed will do. However, that changes it to a string. We want to keep it as a number, and so we have to just convert it to a parse float. You can do a parse int, except that they'll truncate it to a full integer. We want it to be a decimal. Then we want to calculate divert total score. And we give the dive card, and that'll come up in a second. We hide the modal, and then we reprint the divers. Set dive count, again, we bring in the count. We clear the dive card. We change the count. we add one diver back to the list, and we reprint the divers. For judge count, we change the count. We don't have to clear anything out, so we just move forward and reprint the divers. For set meter height, we bring in the height. Again, this is where we clear it, change the height, add a diver back in, and we're back in default position. Calculate calculate diver total score. Bring in the dive card, and it will look through all of the scores, add them up. If it is not null, we add them. If it is null, we just skip it. We then set it as the total score for that card. Again, we grab it. We only want it to be the two decimal places. Makes it a string, so we parse it back to a float. Then we also sort the divers based on total score. And that's what this part will do. It is going to take all the dive cards, sort them, and it's going to make the largest on top instead of on the bottom. We then go through and re-rank them. So we're actually changing the rank column. And that's where we can actually just go by the dive card index. This is then where we calculate how much they need to win. We figure out how many remaining dives they have. We cycle through to see how many when they start to be null, and if they are not null, then it counts it. If it is null, it stops it. So that's how we know how many there are. First time it hits a null, then we know that we've counted all the dives that they've scored. And if it's not 0, then we will divide it and get our score per dive that they need to get to tie. I actually fixed this. We don't have to do the to-do anymore, but we do want to talk about this. So as I talked in my hosting a site on GitHub, you can do an onload, but you can only have one of those per HTML script import. So the second way to do that, so since we already have one for our header and footer, we can say window, add event listener, and so it'll listen to when the load event occurs. When that occurs, it will add one diver. And the whole point of that is that then I don't have to have default HTML in the HTML file. I can just have the header, and then I can add it to the table like I would when I click the button. So it's a little less code heavy, and it will just automatically call this function. So that is how this application works.